In today's workshop build video, I upgrade my workbench with some much needed updates, including some custom 3D printed pop-up bench dogs and assorted accessories, as well as some new clamping mounts and workbench clamp storage. Okay, so where were we? Well, at the end of 2024, I had begun my home office makeover. If you don't already know or haven't seen the previous video, I've begun the process of redoing or revamping my home office. I've built a couple of cabinets, which are the preliminary stages of a new desk build that I'm going to do. But there's still a lot to finish on that. There's still a couple more cabinets that need to be built. There's obviously a lot of shelving that I'm going to do. There's a big bookcase that I want to build. There's some other little miscellaneous home office infrastructure kind of cool things that I want to do, especially with the 3D printer. So it's going to be a whole project, and I think that's something that's going to take many, many months to complete or do. And I should really get cracking on to the next stages of that. But like all good woodworkers, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do a 180 and I'm going to work on some other project. Specifically, I'm going to work on this, my workbench. There's an old saying, you don't know what you know until you know it. And nothing could be closer to the truth when it comes to my workshop. My workshop is an example of an ongoing learning process. And it's part of the reason why I tend to build everything either incrementally or in a modular fashion. I've never built a workshop and I haven't even really been woodworking that long. So it's hard to know what I'm supposed to know or need to know until I learn those things as I go along. And it's a large part of the reason why my philosophy on workshop projects is that they're either DIY, because we learn a lot when we do it ourselves, and more importantly, that they're modular and adaptable and changeable. Now this workbench is my original workbench. It's the workbench that I first built when I started my woodworking journey some 3 or 4 years ago. And it of course has gone through one major upgrade, which is documented on this channel. And like all of my things in my workshop, it's now time to add some incremental functionality to it. So a little bit of what I've learned over the last year or year and a half in regards to a couple of pain points that I have with the table, a couple of new features I'd like to implement because I think that they will be useful for some of the tools that I use, and obviously take it to the, almost, well, I won't say the next level, but slowly increment or slowly increase its effectiveness as a workbench. So item number 1 on the upgrade menu is a really easy one. When I first upgraded the workbench, I installed this plate that holds these plastic bins vertically to one end of the bench. The initial intention was to use these bins to hold some miscellaneous hardware like screws and nails for quick access, but the reality is that I never used it. It's proved to be more of a dust collector than any useful cubby for hardware, and there are better things that can be stored on this end of the bench. On the other side of the bench is a clamp rack, which is just a dowel with clamps hanging off it. It would be really useful to have clamp storage on both sides of the table, and while I could simply put another dowel or bar like I did before, I decided to go a bit more fancy and designed these 3D printed clamp brackets. They snugly fit the bog standard Craft-Rite clamps and makes this end of the bench much more useful now. If you're interested in printing out some for yourself, then I'll have files available on my website. Now the next upgrade I want to implement into the workbench is to install some dog holes and some dog hole pegs. Now the concept of installing dog holes into a workbench is hardly earth-shattering. It's a very common feature amongst workbenches. But the one thing that I haven't seen people do is attempt to make or design dog hole pegs around 3D technology, specifically 3D print technology. And that's what I'm going to attempt here. So of course this is experimental. It's going to be part learning, part discovery, and will at least at the very end, at a bare minimum, answer the question on whether or not you can create, 3D printed dog holes. I hope the answer is yes, but there's only one way to find out. So let me take you through my design, how I'm going to implement it, and we'll go from there. The basis of my Benchdog design is around this, a spring-loaded cabinet door opening mechanism. Now, these are usually used in cabinetry to create pop-out door openings for cabinet doors, and I've used them in the past for that exact purpose. But in this application, I think it will make a great pop-up and retract mechanism for our Benchdog. Now, for the Benchdog peg itself, again, it's a very simple design. So this is our peg. There is an opening that's created here, or a recess, that is designed to fit this particular mechanism exactly. So we have a nice friction fit, like so. And this will then go into a Benchdog hole housing that I've created. So again, very simple design. It's just a tube. There is a lip at the top here. This is going to be recessed into the workbench surface. And this will allow for the Benchdog to pop up and then go back in when we need it. So this is the basis of the idea and design. So this is the core concept. And there's a lot of accessories and things that we can build that will fit into here. However, this is, the basis of what we're working with. So the next thing or next step is to see how we're going to install that into the workbench. Now, before I jump into that, I'm going to give the workbench top a bit of a clean. Now, some of you might be wondering why I don't just make a new top, and that's a valid question, but there are two reasons why I'm not going to do that, or at least not do that now. First and foremost, this is an experiment, and I'd rather experiment on the current top than go to the effort of installing a new one and getting that wrong. The current top here is certainly not going to be the last one for this workbench, and it makes sense to experiment now and not waste materials. The second reason is that despite its looks, this is still a perfectly flat and perfectly serviceable workbench top. While it needs some cleaning and a little scraping to remove some old glue, it will still behave exactly like a new one. So other than a few scratches and one specific laser incident, this will be fine to continue to use. Okay, so I've put some rudiment marks where I think the Benchdogs will go. It might be hard to see because obviously it's just grey lead on black, and yes, I do know I've got to get myself a white pencil. I don't know why I haven't done it yet, but this obviously is not perfect. It's just a rough working out of where these are going to go. Obviously, I'm going to try and use some sort of template to get these in line as best as possible. So I'm pretty certain we can come up with something probably on the laser and a combination of things to try and get these all lined up as we go. In terms of the spacing, I've just arbitrarily chosen 150 millimeters, which according to the research that I've done is roughly 6 inches, which is what apparently most gaps or distances use in this type of system. I don't know if there's a specific standard or rule or thing or recommendation on it. That's just what I'm going with, and that seems to be a reasonable grid. All I've done is start from the very center. So this is our center one, and I've kind of gone outwards until I've got within a reasonable distance to the edges. Now I can't go too close to the edge, obviously, because we do have an overhang for the bench. And those of you who are concerned that when these are sitting in the bench, these are quite long, we've got quite a lot of room to play with. So this bench part is nearly 50 millimeters thick. And then there's another 60 millimeters here. And even then, if we look under there here, you can see I've got quite a big gap coming down here. So there will be plenty of room to make space for this. So shouldn't have a problem in regards to that aspect. But I think the next thing to do here is to come up with an alignment template and work out how we're going to drill into the bench here. So a quick trip over to the laser to make a template, and I cut that out using some 6mm spare MDF. So here is our template. As you can see, 4 holes are strategically located that represent the 4 corners of any of these grids. So we should be able to line this up like so. It should reference exactly in these corners and the dead center where we're going to need to drill the holes. And then as we move down and drill those holes, we should be able to put some Benchdogs in there to lock that in and hopefully keep the alignment straight as we go down the table. So that's the hope, that we can keep this as square as possible. Now, in order to be able to drill those holes, I'm just going to use stock standard Forstner bit. But to keep everything straight, I have designed this little adapter guide for this Forstner bit specifically. And the idea is that the Forstner bit goes in here like so, and there's nowhere for it to play. and obviously we can drill up and down. And the idea is that it's got these little notches here, as you can see, on each one. And the idea will be is that you can reference the lines going across this way, so you know exactly where the center of that Forstner bit's going to be. And then you just give it a little tap, and it will create a little divot exactly where you need to drill. So handy. So hopefully that will help us keep everything nice and straight. If you're interested in this, let me know in the comments. I might throw these files up, or the 3D print files up for it, if you're interested. So let me know. Now, at some stage, you just got to get brave and drill some holes. And after all the careful planning, making templates, making adapters, measuring, triple measuring, making all sorts of guides to ensure that everything is straight, everything is correct, I, of course, proceed to drill a hole that is too small. Right, so no matter how much you carefully plan, you have to double check, triple check your Forstner bits. So I have accidentally grabbed the wrong Forstner, which is the size for this thing, which you think, oh, well, that's all right. You can just do it that way. But of course, I need it for this one. This is the housing, and of course, it's the wrong size. It needs to be slightly bigger. So I think we can fix this. We might need to get creative in fixing that, but you know what? I'm going to move on to this one and try and do this one properly and see how we go. Right, so here we go again, round 2, this time with the correct Forstner bit. Okay, so we have our hole. I'm really happy with it. It's nice and neat. I'm pretty sure it's very straight. And this time we have the right size. So that's going to fit in there just nicely. So we're happy with this, not happy with that. I'm going to have to fix that and work out how I'm going to do that. But first we'll work on this one. Now, obviously we need to cut a rebate below the surface for this lip. And we need to make sure that it's, you know, exactly in the right spot. If it's a little bit off, then this is not going to sit flush with the surface of the workbench. So the solution to that is, once again, using a bit of technology. So I've got this 3D printed guide, which is the exact size and dimension of this top bit here. And this is going to sit on there to create that perfect spacing to make sure that it's nice and centered. Now, how do we make sure it's centered? Well, again, I made this little sort of adapter, which is going to sit in the hole. So the idea is that this will align the peg, like so. And what we'll then do is I'm going to then use some double-sided tape and I'll hold that in. I'll then take this peg out and we should have the perfect spacing. And then I'm going to use a pattern bit on my palm router set to the right depth to then route out below here. So I'll show you what that's going to look like now. Oh, wow. Okay, fast forward and you join us at an exciting time. So I've now installed 2. So we've now got one on this side, one on that side. So I'm very happy with the way this is coming out. And so far, We've even got it to be pretty square. So I know that that's not the critical component, but it would be nice to get these as square as possible. So they are sitting quite nicely and square to the surface of the table. So we cannot complain about that. And now we're going to move on to this corner one. So this is the part where the template that we made earlier should come into effect. So the idea is that this will slot on like so, and this is a bit tricky with one hand. There we go. So that slots on, and that should allow us to line up this next dog hole to make it parallel with this one, parallel with that one, hopefully, fingers crossed. So I've already marked out the center for that using my Forstner bit, and it actually is a little tiny bit higher. So we're talking about millimeters. We are chasing after, you know, a perfection that probably we can't do, but you know, it doesn't hurt to pursue that. So now that I've got that lined up, and then we've got that Forstner, we'll go ahead and do the rest, and hopefully when we come back and I've installed it, we should have nice and square. So we'll see how we go. So this one turned out a little tight, and while we are after a relatively nice friction fit, it's not essential, and this one was way too tight. The tolerances in 3D printing likely explain this, but a quick sand with a drum attachment on the drill press was all that was needed to sort it out. Alright, well we've got 3 now, so 3 is sufficient enough to at least test that our sort of positioning device is going to keep these relatively square, so we can engage our dogs, bench dogs, put a square up against it. Are they all touching? That looks pretty bloody good. In fact, that's square, I guess. Yeah, so far so good. So we've only done 3. Let's not get too excited here ahead of ourselves. So we just need to do, I don't know, 40 odd more. And yeah, we'll be well on our way. Now, I've only 3D printed, you know, a finite amount. There's only about 10. I think we're going to need about 30, 35 more. So we'll get cracking on 3D printing some of those. But other than that, I think we can call this a relative success so far. So I set the 3D printer to crank out a whole bunch more Benchdog and Benchdog holes, and while that was going on, I proceeded to drill out the rest of the holes on the workbench. Now you might notice here I've ditched out my custom 3D printed drill guide in favour of one of those drill guide jigs. It's not that my guide didn't work, but because of the size of my Forstner bit, it can only really drill so far before I need to take it off and manually drill the rest. The custom guide still works really well, just not for deep cutting with a Forstner bit. If I used a spade bit, that would potentially be better, as those tend to have longer shafts. Regardless, the drill guide did an okay job, still required a bit of cleanup with the drum center attachment, but it wasn't too difficult, just really repetitive. And eventually we had some nicely drilled out dog holes ready for the 3D printed parts. So folks, it's been about a week since I finished up doing the Benchdog holes and installing some more Benchdogs themselves into the table. I'm really happy with the way that it's come out, the functionality. I'm happy with the accuracy. It's not 100% perfect, but I think it's getting it's close enough for this first attempt. And certainly I think that if I attempt to do another one and to redo this top, which probably is a reality sometime in the future, what I've learnt from this will certainly allow me to probably make it even more accurate. But what I want to quickly show you is some of the accessories that I've been working on. There is a plethora of potential accessories that one could consider or conceive. There's a few here that I've made myself, and there's a few that I've taken inspiration from other people. So let me show you some of the accessories that I've made. And if you've got suggestions for things that you think would work really well in a system like this, then let me know in the comments. The first one I've been wanting to do ever since I decided to install dog holes are these parallel clamp riser adapters. Using parallel clamps can be tricky, and I wanted something that would hold the clamps off the table surface and stay locked in place, but allow me to then adjust them with a single hand. The design for this is really simple. It's just a 3D printed block with a slot included to accept the clamp, as well as a Benchdog pin to lock them in place. And to do that, I can use the existing clamp riser as a means to secure the clamp in place so it can't move either forward or backward. And that means that I can adjust the clamp with a single hand and not worry about the parallel clamp shifting. So the next accessory that I've had a crack at making myself is a horizontal clamping guide. Now, the idea or the premise is that if you, for example, have your bench dogs engaged and you have a piece of material butted up against them and you want to be able to apply some horizontal clamping pressure, then you'll need some sort of clamp that does it in that direction. Now, I've had a crack at making one myself, and I started off with something very simple. So I had a bunch of these clamps lying around from another project, and I thought that they might make a really good way of providing some horizontal clamping pressure. And it does work, but it's really finicky to use. It takes a lot of adjustment to get right. And ultimately it doesn't apply a lot of clamping pressure. So I ditched this one pretty quickly, and instead I've opted for this one. So this is my current design. It's still not finished. There's still some tweaking that needs to go. It's still not perfect, but we're getting closer to something that is usable. So the idea being that on one end, we obviously have the pad that will grip the work surface. This is just a bit of sandpaper. Again, this is all 3D printed. We've got a handle here that will allow us to make adjustments closer, further away from the timber. And the idea obviously is that we pop that into our Benchdog, do a quick adjustment, and that should secure the timber. Now, again, it's still a work in progress, but we're getting closer to something that's more functional. So hopefully in the near future, once this is sort of more refined, you might see this on the website. The next accessory are these painting or finish pyramids or points. If you are applying finish to a piece, it's useful to be able to lift the project off the table with minimal contact. These points slot into the Benchdog holes, meaning that they won't move as you move the project around. Again, not a new idea, but a very useful accessory. The very last accessory I'm going to show here is these sanding pad discs. They lock into the Benchdog holes and have a rubber disc on the top that helps secure the workpiece while I'm sanding. In the past, I've used an old yoga mat, which does work, but it's a bit of a process getting it out, clearing enough space to use it, and this should make it a lot easier to do basic sanding. The last upgrade is a quick one, and that's to add some clamping T-track to the edges of my workbench. Now, I don't own a vise, and to be honest, I've not had many instances where I've felt desperate for one, but when I've needed to clamp something vertically, I've always just used this Craig clamp vise setup, and that's worked pretty well so far. The only thing is that it's limited to this square, so it would be great to add this around my bench to allow me to use my vise clamps anywhere. So to fix that, I have some aluminium or aluminum T-track that I sourced for quite a reasonable price over at TimberCon. I'll link to the one that I bought in the description. And then from there, I used a bit of double-sided tape to fix it to the edge of my workbench and then secured with some screws. To extend the track right to the other side, I needed to buy two pieces, and I'll need to trim one of the lengths over on the miter saw. Cutting aluminium is fine on regular power tools, it's not going to hurt them, but it's always best to go slow, and do make sure you wear some eye protection to avoid some of those shards. And finally, the last part is to add some support underneath the T-track, and for that I'm going to raid my scrap form ply bin. These are a little too thick, so a quick journey to the thicknesser gets them down to the right size in a jiffy. And watching the chips through the dust collection system never gets old. It was then a quick trim over on the table saw, and then a bit of glue and some brad nails. Nothing fancy here, it's just to finish off. Okay, so that's it for this round of upgrades to the workbench. I'm really happy with the way these upgrades turned out, especially the Benchdogs. I'm really happy with the way that they work, and I'm really keen and excited to explore the other types of accessories, adapters, other types of clamps that will be available for this type of system. I'm also certain this won't be the last version of the bench, but we'll see how these changes go and of course reassess to see what's possible in the future. If you're interested in the 3D files to potentially print your own Benchdogs or maybe even your own clamp rack, then I'm going to have the files available on my website. I'll also link to all of the hardware that I use, and of course if you have any questions, queries, then leave a comment below. Thanks again to all my channel members, thanks for watching, and I will see you on the next one.